Hello, Anne.
Hi.
Uh, and we are going to talk today about satanic ritual abuse. And you are from a family of generational ritual abuse, and you are actually a medical doctor
Retired.
in the United States. Yeah, and a psychiatrist.
Retired psychiatrist.
Yeah, and actually, I am also a medical doctor, and I have worked a long time in Sweden as a neurologist and psychiatrist. And it's very interesting to hear your story and your experiences. Could you please introduce yourself and tell about?
Sure. I began life thinking that I was pretty lucky, coming from an upper middle class American home, Christian home. And I remember once going on a medical mission, and I guess I was 22 years old. Yeah. And there was a man there who said to me that there was a woman at his church who found out that she came from a satanic family and had no memory whatsoever for all the rituals she had been through throughout her childhood. He said to me, looking right at me, "Isn't that amazing that a woman would have all that experience and have no memory for it?" And I said, "Yeah, that's amazing," and thought nothing more about it. And then I remember in medical school studying sexual abuse in women, and I had those symptoms. But I said to myself, you would remember something like that. So clearly it didn't happen to me. They left off that important information about many people forget when they have horrific trauma. It's overwhelming. They put it in their unconscious mind. They didn't teach us that, but they did teach us the symptoms. So that was another clue. And then I did 2 years of residency in pediatrics. And there, it was a public hospital that I worked at a lot. And there were many unmistakable child abuse victims. There were babies with broken femurs. And I'm remembering one particular incident where the doctor was trying to find out from the parents what happened to the baby. And they said the baby fell down. And the doctor said, well, that doesn't explain a broken femur because it's the strongest bone in the body. And they said, well, she fell down on the porch. And how many steps? Well, 1 step. It still doesn't explain a broken femur, strongest bone in the body. And they kept making up stories. Well, how about if she fell off the bed? Would that explain it? They were trying to create a story that would go along with what the doctor knew would break a femur, the strongest bone in the body. And that was very disturbing to me. And I've never forgotten that, how we make up stories to make us feel good about something that was actually very traumatic. So that was one example, but there were many children who were abused, like 2 and 3 year olds that had gonorrhea under the microscope, unmistakable sexual abuse. So with that sort of environment, things started bubbling up in me. That supportive acknowledgement that these things do go on. So I remember one particular evening, I was watching a movie after my pediatric residency, and it happened to be about a girl who was raped by her father. And I remember crying for that girl as I'm watching the movie, just crying and crying, feeling so sorry for her. And I went to bed that night and I had horrific nightmares. Couldn't sleep, tossing and turning, crying in my sleep. And I woke up hysterical with the word incest in my mouth, but I couldn't get it out. I couldn't speak it. It was just stuck there. So I went to work that day, and I happened to be working with a very astute neurologist. And she said to me, I don't know who you are, but you're not the woman I've been working with for the last few months. So all that into my mind, I happened to have made an appointment with a therapist who was very astute with trauma. And I'd been to many therapists over the years, but they would give me diagnoses like dysthymia, just mild depression, or adjustment disorder. I was having trouble adjusting to medical school. And when there were much more serious things going on. So I went to this new woman whose name was Carol. And I told her everything that had happened with the movie and all the child abuse at work, and crying about the movie. And then my colleague saying she didn't recognize me. And in that very first session, she said, "You have a multiple personality disorder and you were incested by your father." And I thought, wow, one session, and I've been going to these people for years, and no one had ever mentioned anything about trauma other than the trauma of medical school. So I really liked this woman. And within a few weeks' time, I found out, I'm not remembering exactly how many weeks, but I found out ritual abuse memories started coming up as well. And this woman had a background of satanic ritual abuse herself. She was from a multi-generational satanic family. She had recovered from multiplicity herself, so she was able to see it and get me into it very quickly. She used something called muscle testing, where you ask, was Anne ever incested? Yes. By her father? Yes. Was it? And she would come up with an age and exactly what happened, and the muscles would say the truth of my life. And I might not have believed her because I could just remember the good stuff, but I had this gut-wrenching pain. I would be crying hysterically. So something in me was saying, oh, yes, that happened, that happened, that happened. So that's what our therapy sessions were like. She taught me muscle testing and muscle tested and all this gut-wrenching stuff. And slowly, I started getting my own memories.
Mm-hmm. And have you confronted somebody in your family, or so you get confirmation that it happened and what happened?
I have had some confirmation, meaning that I wasn't aware of the danger. I was just things coming up for me. So I told my family, silly me. And my father's response was to get in a car, travel to where I grew up, and tell everyone that his daughter had been diagnosed with a mental illness, and she was saying things that didn't make any sense whatsoever, lies and things like that. So he was covering his tracks. Now my mother said, "I'm going to get on a plane and come to see you immediately," which I thought was totally appropriate. Oh, my father also said, when I told him I'd been diagnosed with multiple personality disorder, he said, "Oh, cool, I saw that on a talk show." I didn't find that very appropriate. My mother was completely appropriate. She flew down to see me, and I was telling her what was coming up for me. I just bawled like a baby, and she held me, and I cried hysterically. I was shaking. The emotion was unmistakable, very real. And she was moved. And after me sharing what had been coming up, it was night at that point, and she said, "I'm not going to make a decision right now. I really need to spend some time, and I'll tell you my decision in the morning." And I said, fine. So the next morning, I talked to her over breakfast. She said, "I could not sleep at all because all night long, I'm remembering coming in on your father and seeing him with a child. And he'd make up some story of why this little girl was in his lap, or why he was showing pornography to my brothers when they were just toddlers or, preschoolers. And he always had some sort of explanation like, "Oh, I was trying to teach them that this is bad." Or he'd always come up with something. That storytelling, like with the little girl with the broken femur, was right there. And she said, "How could I have been so stupid?" And she even remembered finding a black robe in his closet and confronting him about it. And he made up some story of why it was there. So she said, "I believe you 100%, and I cannot be married to this man." So she went home and divorced him, just like that. Mm-hmm. Everyone else in the family supported my father. And that is not uncommon, because one thing I found when working in pediatrics, severe trauma survivors, they they cling to their abusers. It seems paradoxical, but I remember one girl saying, "I am the best daddy in the world, even if he did rape me every night." They furiously defend the people that have hurt them the most. And this is one thing I studied when I got into psychiatry, because one of my questions was, what happens to these children? Abused day after day after year, no one challenging their abusers, no one validating their reality, no one helping them work it through. What happens? So my therapist, Carol, thought I would be happier in psychiatry. We muscle tested that would be useful. And I was always a very psychological person anyway. So I switched over to psychiatry, and there I got the answer to my question. What happened to these traumatized children is they were now exhibiting symptoms of mental illness. Not all of them, but some of them. And for example, there was one man who was admitted for paranoid schizophrenia to the psychiatric unit. And when I examined him as part of admission, he had horrible scars down his back, just horrible. And I said, "Sir, what is this about? What happened?" And he said that his dad used to beat him with a belt when he was bad as a boy. Now, his major delusion was that a giant teddy bear was trying to kill him. And his dad's name was Theodore. So it wasn't hard to put these pieces together. And another woman, I'm remembering every time she had a psychotic break, she would go to the library and read books on incest, every book she could get her hands on. So I realize these people are telling their stories through their symptoms, but we're taught not to listen. We're taught to slap on a label of psychotic illness, paranoid schizophrenia, manic depression, whatever it is, rather than listening and responding to that wounded child that's still in an adult body saying, "This is what happened to me. Help me work it through." But in medicine, we weren't helping them work it through unless they had conscious memories. Those that were unconscious, like I was, their stories weren't heard.
Do you believe that your father was in some organized satanic?
Oh, he was. It was international.
Uh-huh.
I have memories of being taken to London when I was 16 for a 3-day festival. We went only at night. We were touring London during the day and Satanic Festival at night. So yes, it is international. And I find people have a hard time believing that. And I struggle with that because my faith that I have now, Christianity, is all over the world. Why would the satanic religion, why would that be any different? And just as Christians are deliberately seeking to help people and to tell them about God, Satanists are deliberately trying to hurt people and implant the satanic belief system in them. So it's just similar to Christianity in form as far as worldwide and seeking to get a message across, but the opposite, and that it's not about love and giving, it's about hate and taking. And that's what they're doing on a massive worldwide scale, as best as I can tell.
And when you were there in London on this festival, Satanic, what happened, or how?
I was taken to the basement of a church, and they had orgies and cannibalism and just horrific things done to people. I hate to speak about them because they're so horrible. I don't like to put that kind of imagery across, but it's everything horrible you can think of and a lot of things that you probably could never imagine.
Yeah, and I must say, for example, when I read MSN.com, sometimes I can understand that for example, a child, a little girl was satanically murdered by in a dentist's office or dentist stool. So I can see it by the numerology and the way how they explain, and like they are happy about that they have killed this child. So it must be, I don't say a lot of medical staff that are doing these things, but I can see it from here, from Europe, for example, in your country, and I'm sure it happened here as well. But we don't have MSN.com, and they don't tell us that so obviously. But have you seen, or have you any experiences that you want to talk about?
Well, the Satanists have infiltrated every aspect of American society as best as I can tell, meaning there are satanic schools. So parents will be sending their kids to what they consider the best school in the area, but it's really run by Satanists. So the children are being mind controlled. They're often being used as child labor, meaning they go to school during the day and at night they're awakened. Not every night, but several nights in the week, awakened and given a job to do, cleaning the school, cleaning the grounds of headmaster or some of the teachers, or cleaning their houses, doing cooking, whatever, but slave labor. And people don't know that. They don't know to be careful, and I would say prayerful, because we can't see these things. They're all under the surface, and we have to get that higher guidance to see, is this school safe for my child? Because it's not just boarding schools, it can be also public schools that they've infiltrated and are using them to mind control the children. It can be hospitals and clinics where they get to people. And I find most people are very cavalier to send somebody off to a hospital thinking that's a helpful thing to do. Well, if Satanists are working there and they get a satanic doctor, it is not helpful. That doctor will be looking to harm in some way. Just as a Christian doctor will be looking to help, a satanic doctor will be looking to harm. And that may be accidentally slipping and cutting something that shouldn't have been cut during surgery. It may be implanting a toxic substance that you won't know about until maybe years later when you get cancer. It may be taking tissue out of something that will show up later. It can be taking blood from people and selling the blood products. It can be anything you can think of, and probably a lot of things, again, you can't think of ways of harming people. And particularly during satanic holidays, Christmas and Easter, going into a hospital is a dangerous thing to do. You know, if you're thinking about elective surgery, pick another time. So yes, very, very dangerous places. And also when people are in a hospital, they can be mind controlled. They can be whisked away at night and given drugs, and mind control is implanted. And then they're suddenly doing what they're programmed to do rather than what is their own volition. For example, if this is done with a child, they can shape the child's character to, every time your mother says something to you, you will argue with her. She says this, you say that. And the child's character becomes argumentative and hostile. And the family, of course, is upset. So what happens? They take the child to the doctor and he gets a label like conduct disorder or some defiant disorder I'm forgetting right now. So the problem isn't seen. And that's the whole thing. When we don't allow ourselves to see Satanists and what Satanists do, we have to make up a story, like the parents with their baby with a broken femur, to explain away the symptoms. And as a result, people are not getting the help they need. They are having various diagnoses, but they're also regressing in their development. We all know that trauma regresses someone. That's well known. If they don't get the help and healing they need, they can regress. So someone who was using the bathroom, a child who was using the bathroom, she's traumatized, suddenly she's back in diapers. We know that. Same thing happens to people of all ages, and we're getting younger and younger and younger as a people because of that. And let me give you an example of that. When I was in my psychiatric training, I was studying the Ericksonian child development, which the first stage is between 0 and 6 months. A baby is learning basic trust or mistrust. The baby can trust that mom and dad is meeting the baby's needs, or mistrust mom and dad, they're not meeting the baby's needs. So recently I was looking up Ericksonian stages, and I learned that now it's 0 to 1 year. So that's doubled. What a baby used to learn in 6 months, the baby is now learning in a year. That's developmental delay. That's scary. And that's what's happening to people in America because of all the trauma and all the unwillingness to look at it. So it's never treated. Human need is not met. We are regressing as a people.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my books, I'm an author as well, is The Awakening Storm. And I talk about how, just as I evacuated from my home in New Orleans to escape Hurricane Katrina, we all evacuate from aspects of our humanity to avoid trauma. So let's say a boy is bullied at school, a tender boy is bullied at school, very vulnerable, tender boy. So he learns to evacuate, disassociate from his tenderness, his vulnerability, never to be tender again. He becomes a tough guy. Well, that's all fine and good as far as dealing with the bullies, but later on in life, he can't be tender and vulnerable with his wife and children. So these things we separate from or disassociate from because of trauma, which we do physically, emotionally, and mentally, and we also disassociate from the spiritual, they wreak havoc on our lives. Mm-hmm. So that's what I talk about in The Awakening Storm. And when we disassociate from this part of ourselves and that part of ourselves and this part of ourselves in order to handle all the trauma that's coming our way, we become less and less and less of a person. So in The Awakening Storm, I talk about how we in America are a nation stuck in infancy. Not entirely, of course, but a chunk of most of us is a baby that has some unresolved trauma. That's my experience. And that baby, a typical baby, isn't real aware, right? Mom and dad can be having an argument, the baby isn't really paying that much attention. So we have all this stuff going on in our society and we're not noticing, like an infant. We're not seeing it because we've disassociated from our perception. We're not feeling it. We're not feeling all the pain of our fellow man and ourselves because we've disassociated from our emotions. We're not feeling what people's physical bodies are going through. Like a typical person going into the hospital, at least in my area, I have a lot of people in church or in my organizations who are middle-aged and elderly, and they're going to hospitals and they're having this procedure and that procedure and this hospitalization, this surgery, and just they're getting more and more scars and they don't seem to be getting well. They are getting into the road of chronic illness and doctor visits, and there are other pathways, but they seem stuck in that pathway of getting cut and medicated rather than being listened to and find out what the ultimate problem is and work it through. And to me, this is part of post-traumatic stress. and that people are recreating their traumas in hospitals rather than dealing with them, getting to the bottom of it. Well, what is our soul communicating through this particular affliction? We are medicating the symptoms, trying to eradicate the voice that says there's something wrong. And I actually write about this in my second book, Illness Can Be the Cure, that our souls are communicating in every single symptom we have, but we're not listening. We're trying to quiet the voice rather than hearing it and responding as a human being. So when we evacuate from these different aspects of ourselves, our sensing equipment, whether it's physical sensing or emotional sensing, or our sharp mind sensing what's in the environment, picking up intelligently what's going on, we don't have the equipment that tells us what's happening and can do something about it in the right way and the way that's most likely to get through. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and how many in percentage, how many people do you believe within medical profession you would say are involved in Satanism, or is it a lot of people you believe, or have you seen a lot of?
I couldn't give a percentage because my background is kind of skewed because I come from a satanic family, and it took me years to get all the satanically involved people away to figure out who they were and kind of clean up my life. So with that background, it seems a lot higher than someone that, say, it comes from a rural place where maybe there isn't any Satanism, or maybe one satanic church or something like that. So in my perspective, it is something everyone needs to be aware about and very, very prayerful about which doctor to go to, when to be hospitalized, what clinic, what hospital, and be very, very sensitive to the fact that loving, gentle treatments exist. And I know there's a time for surgery. I know there's a time for medication. I know there's a time for every procedure. But Satanists use these things to practice their satanic arts, do something harmful. So we always have to be aware of when, where, how, who, as far as our medical needs are concerned. And I think spirituality is not an option. People say, oh, it's a choice. In this dangerous world, I don't think it is. I think we all have to find our spiritual path and pursue it as if our lives are at stake, because they are. There's so many dangers in our world right now. Polluted water, polluted food, angry, aggressive people acting out their post-traumatic stress. By the way, I define post-traumatic stress a little differently than my colleagues in the profession, and that, at least during my training, post-traumatic stress was more a focus on the physical body, as far as a threat to my physical being, or injury to my physical being, or maybe a sexual assault to my physical being. And I see it as an assault to our psychological being as well. So both trauma to physical or psychological bodies. So I leave off the word disorder, because a lot of people with post-traumatic stress don't seem particularly disordered. And also, if we're looking for a major trauma and we ask people, which I once did when I was working in hospitals, have you had any trauma in your life? Most people told me no. Can you imagine? No trauma? As if that's possible? We live in a traumatic world. It's just a matter of degree. I know not everyone was raised in a satanic family like I was, but a lot of people got a taste of Satanism, either in school, in churches. Churches are another area where Satanists deliberately try to infiltrate, putting their ministers in, or finding a way to mind control the minister that's already there. Maybe he wins a special sweepstakes and is taken on a cruise for practically nothing while he and his whole family are mind controlled during that cruise. Or maybe there's a special church retreat for a weekend where the mind control process starts. People have to be so careful, so careful. Satanists are using every way they can to try to get to whoever they want to get to. And unless we're very careful, prayerful, and developing ourselves so we have that instrumentation of physical feeling, emotional feeling, clear mind, not burdened by past trauma, we need that to see them and see what they're doing and step around it and help others. And that's what I find. People, one of the things that keeps people out of therapy, I'm very pro-therapy for obvious reasons. What keeps people out of therapy is they can't face their lives because they've evacuated from their human instrumentation that would allow them to see and sense what's going on around them. They haven't been able to protect their children. And so I've been talking to you a little about post-traumatic stress. The two main categories in the way I see it is recreating your trauma or avoiding your trauma. The two categories of post-traumatic stress. And we do this mentally, emotionally, physically, and relationally. So someone mentally recreating their trauma would be obsessing about it, thinking about it all the time, or getting flashbacks. We all know about the car backfiring, and the veteran of the war will be suddenly thinking people are firing at him. We know that. Emotional recreations would be like, I'm thinking one client I said good morning to, and he said, I don't like your attitude. I triggered something in him. So it's when we react inappropriately to what's going on in the present because we're back reacting to something in the past. And then there's physical recreations, like when I drink coffee, my body just goes into overdrive, fast heart rate, anxiety, because I had to drink a lot of coffee to get out of the drug state of the rituals or working at night or that sort of thing. So I'd be awake for the morning. And so I have the two paired. So when I drink coffee, it's a physical recreation of my trauma. And then there's a relational recreation of when we marry abusive people, because we've had an unresolved abuse from our past, we're recreating our trauma. People so often, this is well documented, treat their wives and children, husbands and children, as they were treated growing up. So relational recreation. And then the ways of avoidance are similar. Mental avoidance, positive thinking. Don't let any negative thought go in your head. I don't want to hear any negativity. Well, then you're not going to hear about Satanism, and you're not going to see that it's everywhere because you're not hearing about it. They won't go there because they're avoiding their own trauma. Also, emotional avoidance. I know a lot of people that happy, I only have love in my heart. I used to be that way myself. As a matter of fact, I'm remembering going to a naturopathic doctor when I was 21, I think it was, 23. And he told me I was full of rage. And I was a born-again Christian. No rage here. I only have love. He took a finger and he stuck it into my liver. And I just was so angry in that moment. And all I could say was, you're right. So we have the full range of emotions in every single one of us. And when we're only happy, only joyful, only loving, we've evacuated from all the other feelings, which means we've had a bad experience with them somewhere. We're not comfortable with them. So that's a red flag, sign of post-traumatic stress. Physical avoidance would be someone who can't feel their physical body, or maybe they don't want to have any physical relationships, no intimacy with their partners. And then, which is also part of relational recreation, or relational avoidance, we avoid relationships or certain aspects of relationships because they remind us of our trauma. So all that to say is, when we live within a world of post-traumatic stress, which is the theme of my book, The Awakening Storm, people are recreating their trauma or avoiding their trauma a lot. But we're not calling it that as a society. We are recreations of trauma, criminality, or if it's these people are in politics, we call it corruption. Or if they're in a psychiatric ward, we call it mental illness. We're doing everything but seeing that these people have post-traumatic stress and treating that stress, looking at the traumas they're recreating mentally, emotionally, physically, and relationally, or avoiding mentally, emotionally, physically, or relationally. And my old profession of psychiatry, I believe, has been molded by people who are in the avoidance of their post-traumatic stress and not willing to see and admit to and treat the trauma that most psychiatric patients are suffering from.
And many of us can see or believe that the Satanism within politics, that it's rising like in all fields now. Not you feel that also? That's like it's more and more. Yeah.
Yes.
I feel that too, and more visible, like that you can see it in many fields, especially, and also within military. You have the feeling that it's a lot of abuse there.
And these people, like, for example, in politics or the military, are recreating their traumas sometimes on a massive scale. Oh my goodness. Like, for example, in my book, The Awakening Storm, it's about the Katrina disaster in New Orleans. I believe they misbuilt the levees deliberately. That's my belief, because they wanted to destroy the city. And I go through all of that in my book of how, why, whatever. Ultimately, what we get to is people in post-traumatic stress recreating their traumas. So a voice that is unheard, like we're not hearing the voices of our children crying out for help with all their misbehaviors, emotional lability, or no emotions at all. That's also a red flag. When we're not hearing them, that voice gets louder. And if we're not hearing the verbal voice, the human voice, the voice goes into the body, the animal, into behavior. And so these voices get louder behaviorally. And that's what I feel we're seeing the world over, these horrific things going on, like the escalating mass shootings. I saw that statistic recently. The mass shootings in America are going up and up and up every year. And to me, these are people in post-traumatic stress, recreating their trauma in an extreme way because no one was hearing the lesser ways. So we've got to start hearing. We've got to start dealing with what's really going on and not just covering up the symptoms or eradicating the symptoms.
I believe that it was false flag operations, like military false flags, not real. That it's fake terror, fake by.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
but still, the people that are arranging that are recreating their traumas. You see what I mean? Meaning deception, storytelling, cover-ups, trying to get someone to do something that they wouldn't normally do by making this whole scene.
Yeah, I believe that there is a breakaway society here that have like taken over the world, and they are in the last steps just to kill us now, kill off us, and that they are doing so many false flags now everywhere, and such a chaos, because they want to finish their work that they have been working for in hundreds of years or thousands of years, actually. And it would be like the end now, end of us, others. So I feel that they are rushing so much in all fronts, like to kill of us, simply. It, I feel that way. And then I don't know what you believe about Nibiru, but I believe it's very close now to the Nibiru flyby, and that they want to uh, leave the planet, this breakaway society, and many, they are Satanists, or in my opinion, so that they are rushing now so much with this whole plan to get rid of us. So, and these are Satanists, so
Yeah, there's no doubt they're killing a lot of people. And I don't know anything about what's going on in space. That's not my field, so I better not say anything about that. I really don't know. But what I do think is very powerful is the metaphor of a huge rock hitting our planet. As in my book, The Awakening Storm, I talk about how as more and more we evacuate from aspects of our humanity to deal with trauma, we become less and less human. And we can so evacuate from our humanity, like my father did, that we have no humanity left for all practical purposes. My dad was a psychopath. So there was no emotion to appeal to. It was gone. He had evacuated from that. There was no human mind to beseech. He was programmed. He didn't care what happened to my physical body. There was no physical resonance of, I don't want to hurt what my daughter, that would hurt me. No, he was just always recreating his trauma. And this is how I got to this understanding, is I had to figure out why a man would do something to his own child. I was just driven to find out why. That's one of my themes of my childhood, why. And that's when I finally realized that he was so utterly traumatized that he had nothing human left. He could have made other choices. He didn't. And all that was left was this rolling rock, the youngest stage of development, which I call rocks and minerals, the youngest psychological stage of development of someone who's been so chronically and horrifically traumatized that they're no longer human. He was just rolling through life, doing to others what was done to him. And so I bring that up because the rock is that youngest stage of development, and these people have taken over many, many aspects of our society, and they are pounding us, and it's only going to get worse. We are going to be hit in a way that we've never known, and we have to get ready for it. And that's one thing I find so concerning, is like going to churches and educational forums. Where are the people that are saying, hey, we gotta wake up, we gotta do something? People like you, who I'm so grateful for, you're getting the information out, but there's so few people doing that, particularly those in leadership.
I believe this year will be a really big awakening. It will happen something really big, so that people will be forced to wake up. I believe between now, November 2017, and November 2018 will happen really big things. So people will be surprised how they were sleeping all these years.
And infants sleep a lot. Physical infants do, psychological infants do. They're not literally sleeping, of course, but they're sleeping in the way you mean, that they just don't notice. They just go about their lives and they're not really involved with what's going on.
Yeah, I believe it will be a shock for them, for many, what will happen now this coming year. So, and I hope we will handle it anyway. Well, at least the outcome is better, I believe, because some of us have been wakened up. So I believe many, not so many, but at least enough of us have waken up in time so that like 7 billion people wouldn't be killed, because the plans from 2012 that were stopped by a few people, it would be like really 7 billion people would be killed. And now we have the end of 2017 and it didn't happen. So at least that was stopped. But what is coming next year, within this next year, I believe that it will be a real awakening, a shock maybe for many. But we have at least chance. We wouldn't have chance if the plan of the Illuminati, of the Satanists, would have been worked out this last 5 years from 2012. It didn't happen, and I know a little bit about the plan. And I guess you have heard whistleblowers from your country, like Rima Leibo or George Green, Lindsay Williams, that have met people with these elites or Illuminati who were planning to kill billions of people. So I guess you have heard about these whistleblowers too, or isn't it so?
Oh, I know there are whistleblowers out there. I'm not familiar with the ones you mentioned.
No, but anyway, I believe it will be an awakening this year, really shocking for many. But it's what I believe. So,
Well, I believe we are here to evolve. And when we think we're here to have a good time, we're sorely mistaken. And that's a childlike, again, psychology, childlike psychology. And usually it takes a good disaster. And I shouldn't say the word good, but it takes a disaster or some trauma to wake us up. And that's what I finally realized about my own life. I've been through so many disasters as far as my disastrous childhood, the Katrina disaster, all the disasters going on in medicine, and so many different things and aspects of society, that's what it took to get me where I am today. And I wish I could have learned in an easier, gentler way, but that's what it took. And in that, I like where I am. And I have a certain understanding that it's going to take a lot to wake up my fellow man, just like it's taken me a lot. And so I feel disaster has a purpose to get us to remember why we're here. We're here to grow, we're here to evolve, and we're here to help our fellow man evolve. And when we do that, we become part of the healing circle, and we can help people to do it themselves. So that's what I feel this time is about. We can change the course. Like you said, oh, that didn't happen. We can change what would have happened just by our consciousness right now, just by our giving our all that we're supposed to be right now, working on ourselves and our families right now. That makes a difference. We can all do something just by evolving ourselves and our families and those close to us.
Yeah, it's important.
It's vital. It's vital. And our world is demanding it. It's that voice, that voice that needs heard. That voice to evolve, that call to evolve.
Thank you so much that you talked about your story and talked to me today. And thank you
so much. I enjoyed it.
Me too. Bye-bye, Anne.
Bye.
Bye.